Very factual stuff that the brother laid out. And I just want to add, like I said, another point. And this is a thing that has been done. The military, defense for Veterans Affairs, and nuclear weapons programs takes up 60% of the United States budget, 60%. The other 40% goes to other stuff, which I'll break down later. All right, our next speaker is going to be Joseph Jazz Hayden from the new Jim Crow. Brother's going to explain to you how this whole thing hooks up to the new Jim Crow. Brother, explain to what Jim Crow is. Some of the young brothers and sisters don't know what Jim Crow is.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yeah.
Good evening.
Coming up off I hate to make excuses to start out with, but I'm coming up off of real cold bronchitis. So my voice is kind of weak. I sat here and listened to my brother here, Dell, and and they pretty much laid out the outline of the prison industrial complex. But what I want to do is take the historical perspective and bring you forward to this period of mass incarceration. Because one thing this country has a tendency to do is history doesn't matter. They tend to, they'll do something foul yesterday and then they'll dress it up as something positive the next day and put a spin on it. But history, they don't like to look at the history. History is something that they tend to shy away from. Well, this whole prison industrial complex comes out of a historical process that began on the shores of Africa, when Africans, or better still, its antecedents can go back even further than that. We can go back to Western Europe and the feudal period and the rise of capitalism and Western expansion all around the world. And so the imperial period, the colonial period, all that fits in there. But this prison industrial complex is a product of that history. Right? People like to say that we started out African Americans. I'm speaking from the African American perspective, because that's the perspective that I know best. History describes our beginning contact with this country, Africans, as slaves. But the fact of the matter was, we started out as prisoners on the shores of Africa. Anybody familiar with African geography and history know that those prisons that they have built on the shores of Africa, they held what were later to be slaves, right? And what made it possible for them to capture that population was tribalism. Some of the same things we see happening today with the Crips and the Bloods, NYPD. These are no different than the tribes back then. And the kids gangbanging in the street are feeding right into the criminal justice system, into this prison industrial complex, just as Africans battling amongst themselves and selling one another off ended up in that system of prison and slavery. Right? So anyhow, we got captured in Africa and reduced to prisoners and then transported across the sea to this Western Hemisphere, where our labor was then stolen from us. Now the European purpose all along was they needed labor, and that's what this whole thing has been about and continues to be about. It's about labor. It's about the economy. It's about the economic system that was driving it. Well, anyhow, the plantations were no different than the prisons are today, right? You were on them. You couldn't get off them plantations. They were surrounded. And that was your life right there on the plantations. And the prison industrial complex that was just described to you is no different than that. They capture us in the Harlems, the Bed-Stuys, the South Bronxes of New York City, and then they transport us to put us in vans instead of on ships, and they transport us to this prison industrial complex upstate, where our labor is exploited, as was related to you by Dell. But step by step, they had us on the plantations. And before I go any further, let me say that how many of you have read Michelle Alexander's book, New Jim Crow? Okay, we got to do some pushing here. Y'all fall behind. This is a group of students, right? All right, we'll get that book. All right. Slavery, one of the statistics that she likes to tout is the fact that we have more people under control of this criminal justice injustice system, this military industrial complex, or this prison industrial complex, that we had in slavery in 1850. That's 10 years before the Civil War started. We have more people under the control of the criminal justice system than we had in slavery in 1850, 10 years before the Civil War started. Okay? And as was stated earlier, America represents 5% of the world's population and has 25% of the world's prisoners. I mean, this isn't just modern day America. America has the biggest prison population in the history of humankind on this planet. No other civilization, empire, none has put these many people in cages and had the other 5 million on leashes, because that's literally what parole, probation, and house arrest is. All right, so slavery ends in 1865. They passed the 13th Amendment. But the 13th Amendment has an exception clause in it. You know, who knows, who can cite what the 13th Amendment? You got it?
Yeah.
The language?
Yeah.
Yeah, slavery is abolished except for those.
Slavery and involuntary servitude is hereby abolished in the United States and all its jurisdictions, except when it is punishment for a crime when the party has been duly convicted.
Except for a crime when the party has been duly convicted. So slavery is alive and well in America, right? So in 1865, when the plantation doors closed, the prison doors opened wide, right? And we had chain gangs, convict leasing, you know, sharecropping system, which were all variations on slavery, you know. And then in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson brought into existence the first apartheid nation on this planet, right? Which was America, not South Africa, not Israel, which is one of the newest apartheid nations on the planet. And they put that system in place in 1896. This was coming from, and every institution in this country obeyed that, you know, and supported that Jim Crow system, you know, separate, what they called it, separate but equal, you know. Well, that was probably African Americans suffered more during that period, you know, from say 1865 during the Reconstruction period. Blacks were elected to office in unprecedented numbers, of course, and, you know, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, we wasn't wielding no political power. But once the Emancipation Proclamation, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment came into place, not out of the goodness of Abraham Lincoln's heart or the Republicans that, you know, won the Civil War, but because they had won the war on the battlefield, but they were getting ready to lose it in the Congress. And so to avoid that, you know, unacceptable circumstance, they gave the right to vote to former slaves.